This video is for business people who want to increase their business success through organizational change. Are there any things in your company that you'd like to change? My guess is yes, unless your company is currently perfect, in which case you're totally good. So watch to the end of this video for bonus material on our best shared and scientifically validated change techniques. Now, when I say our, I'm talking about myself and the book I'm going to review today, which is Katie Milkman's How to Change. So this is How to Change by Katie Milkman, book review. Also, I have a recommended video about using positivity and reframing and other things to also facilitate change, and I will put that at the end of the video for your watching enjoyment. So for me, I'd love it in terms of changes in my company. I'd love it if I never had to build another web page or email campaign or any marketing content ever again. Because it's not really my thing. I don't like doing it. Now, the irony of this is a lot of the skills, a lot of the underlying things that are necessary for doing those things, I do every single day when I make a video. I usually create an image, I write a script, I carefully consider my words. So it's a lot of the same thing. And I actually find marketing really fascinating, but the specific marketing, and I'm just going to call it marketing grunt work for me, is painfully boring, even though it uses some of the skills I enjoy when I apply them in other areas. So for me, what I'd love to do is outsource all of the parts of my business that I hate. And the parts I just mentioned, honestly, I do hate them. There's something about them that isn't fun for me. Unfortunately, I first have to change myself to like, or at the very least, become more conscientious and disciplined about doing these things that are least favorite to me, but at least to the time being, I can, should, and must do them for myself so I understand them better before I outsource them, which will be absolutely on the plate when I can. So I can stay in my zone of genius rather than in these things I don't want to do. So essentially, for reasons I don't understand, I really don't like creating web pages and email campaigns, and I have to push myself to do them. And like I said, it's weird given that writing, creating images, producing daily videos has a lot of overlapping skills, and I enjoy them even though I enjoy these, even though they're challenging. In a way, I do not enjoy those other tasks with related but only slightly different application of those skills. So in Katie Milkman's book, I have to say this is the very best book for solving change challenges, like the ones I just mentioned of my own and yours, I've ever listened to date. And the reason is she took a perspective I hadn't seen before. Now, when I say this is kind of a big claim because I've read many top-notch books on this topic by top-notch and leading-edge researchers. And with exception to the fact, so this book started really strong, and then somewhere in the middle, there were a few things. It's like, well, I've heard all this before. So I started to doubt whether I'd enjoy the book, and then she finished strong. So it was the U-shaped curve. In any case, though, overall, this is an excellent, highly recommended book because of the following reasons. So the main reason why I like this book so much is because it taught me a lot. And I'm not saying this to be egocentric, but when you've read hundreds of books, especially books on related or overlapping topics, oftentimes you hear or read the same things over and over and over again, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's not as interesting as hearing something new or hearing the same concepts from a new perspective that helps you think of more ideas. This is something that Angela Duckworth said in her book that I really loved. The difference between newbies, that is, people who are doing something for the first time or just learning a new skill, is everything is new. So novelty and the interest that comes from novelty, because your brain does love novelty, you don't get bored with it, comes from everything being new. But as you get more advanced, this is replaced, since you know the foundational stuff and you see it over and over again, with nuance. I thought that was an interesting nuance on the idea. So the novelty for people who are advanced in some topic or knowledgeable at some topic, then they get the joy and novelty from the nuance within things they already know really well. And this book provided for me both new and nuance, which is why I enjoyed it so much. So essentially what it is for me is the more a new book teaches me something new, the more I like it, because as you read more books, you get a diminishing return, or as you listen to more books, you get a diminishing return on how many books teach you something truly new. So that's always the sort of the greatest thrill of finding books that do that, especially within the topics, if you're focusing on certain topics as I am doing. So not only is it the more I like it, the more it can teach me, the more new things it is, but it's also benefits me the most the way it would for you as well. When you read a book and you realize a whole bunch of new things, you learn a whole bunch of new things, is super valuable. So the other thing it did that I really liked is it gave scientific validation to some of my own techniques that I've developed independent of my learning over years of living life and always testing things, but that I'd never found or heard any research about. So it took some techniques that I'd been doing that I was completely confident worked from experience, but didn't have any studies to point to give that scientific validation, which is really important because all of us are biased and all of us can be very confident, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's objectively scientifically true. So it's always a joy to be able to say, okay, I knew it. It was exactly as I thought. My intuition was right. And that helps you build confidence and all that kind of stuff, pets your ego. But mainly it shows me that it wasn't just my imagination, that there is objective validation, scientific validation of some of the techniques I've been using that hadn't been validated anywhere else that I'm aware of. So the top reason that that I loved this book is that she is the first behavioral scientist ever that I can think of to honestly and overtly admit that even the very best behavioral change techniques, that none of them are the final word. Most of the books on this topic, especially wrote for popularity, like, do this technique and your whole life will be perfect. I did this and my life is perfect now. Do this and your life will be perfect like mine. Buy my damn book. And I'm going to be honest with you, it pisses me off because it's the golden bullet bullshit that is unfortunately really encouraged by the algorithms. It's like, oh, they liked it, so the algorithm likes it. So the more you do clickbait, the more you're full of shit and give easy, simple, universal answers that don't really work. It reinforces that behavior. And I want the truth. I want things that work as they do for everybody, and to identify where they don't work as well, because I'm a science geek. So none of these uber solutions that people tend to pitch are final or lifelong, especially when you're talking about changing, challenging things and ongoing things, because the circumstances can change. And because our brains are smart and adapt, and they're smart enough to adapt and sort of gain the behavioral change techniques. So you learn a technique and sometimes it will work for a while, and then your brain figures out a way, and probably not even consciously, you change your behavior, and now you're getting the cake without having to do the work. And your brain likes that. Your brain likes reward without effort, because effort means energy. And at least in evolutionary history, that was scarce, and everything that you did to save energy wouldn't help you survive. Now, it's just making us fat, unhealthy, lazy, crybabies, and it's killing us. if we choose to follow those defaults, which we never have to, but is our most basic natural tendency. So what this means essentially is that for organizational change, it also requires ongoing and evolving effort that when changes don't stick or when changes start and then stall, and sometimes that has nothing to do with the change effort or the adaptation of behavior in the organization, but everything to do with external circumstances that nobody in the company, nobody in the change effort has any control over, like COVID-19. Now, I want to make a really important point here. There is no distinction, and if you think there is, you're fooling yourself, between organizational change and personal change, because all organizations, until the robots take over, are people, and therefore change still is always going to occur most fundamentally and at the most basic level within individual people with the same challenges that you and I have. If you have no challenges, you're a robot. So all change, organizational or otherwise, is personal change. Just like all business, personal or otherwise, is personal at some level and at a fundamental level. So here are my biggest takeaways from this book, and I've just basically pinged on one or two for each chapter. So the first one was called Getting Started. That was the name of the chapter. The big takeaway from that is something called the fresh start effect. And like you might guess by the name, it's when you use any situation, change in circumstances or date to start something new that you want to change. And it actually works pretty well. I mean, the classics are, and they work poorly, New Year's resolutions, moving to a new city, going off to college or something like that, changing location, moving to a new town, whatever, and birthdays. But Katie points out something that's really important, and that is that we can find or choose or even invent, create a fresh start at any time using anything, and that is brilliant. I'm going to be honest, I've said that too, that I kind of hate New Year's resolutions, not because they're not a good idea to set well-intentioned personal or professional change, but because New Year's is once a year, and that's a lame excuse to procrastinate until the new year to get started. And let's face it, there's an implicit these days, perhaps always, cultural bias in that, saying, well, it's a New Year's resolution. Nobody really expects it to happen anyway. And that's true, which is why a New Year's resolution is perhaps the least effective by far, because of the expectations that are now around it, the cultural expectations. So there's a word of caution, though. Even if you make great, I become really good at making these fresh starts and identifying new fresh starts for you, is that this is all too easily becomes an excuse for you to procrastinate something that you could be doing immediately. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, well, you know, I know somebody who talked about meditating. It was like, I'm going to set an intention to meditate next week. And my only response was, why don't you just start tomorrow? For them, in that situation, maybe that was the best strategy, because maybe it stuck better because they had intended to start next week and they'd set a solid date. Conversely, they could have started tomorrow or even today, but they didn't. I haven't checked back with them as to whether they did it. To be honest, my bet, knowing them quite well, is they haven't yet started. So it probably wasn't the best strategy. So let's look at the next one, and that is one of the tricks with this is to strengthen your fresh starts. The more personally meaningful, the greater the psychological or objective change associated with the fresh start, the more likely that new change will stick. The more likely that fresh start will be the tipping point for you. So moving to a new country, I live in Japan, is a major fresh start if you designate it as such and decide to change your behavior. It's much more likely to stick than moving across the street, or tomorrow is Saturday, I'm going to start tomorrow. The more meaningful and significant it is, the more difference it has from your current state, the more likely it's going to be a powerful trigger or fresh start for you to engage in a personal change. So something else is that you should be mindful that your new fresh starts, and this was a brilliant insight that I hadn't thought of before, but that your new fresh starts don't disrupt or derail current desirable behaviors. So if you go, okay, what I'm going to do is tomorrow I'm going to start exercising after lunch, or let's say before lunch, or immediately after work, but you're also doing something else. You're already taking a course that you've already been in for a few weeks or a few months that is going to help you advance your career. And now it's going to conflict with that, or the amount of hours in the day is going to conflict with that. And I'll cover that later, why you should focus on fewer rather than more changes at any one time for entrenching new habits. So essentially what it is just make sure when you design or select your fresh starts that they're not going to interfere with the good behavior that you've already started, especially if it's new and not yet entrenched or established. Now, if you've been doing it for years and you add a new fresh start, it's probably going to have zero effect. But just be aware of that, because saying, well, I'm going to quit smoking, but I'm going to eat more fried chicken, or you quit smoking successfully, but as a result, you start eating more fried chicken, you haven't probably put yourself ahead anymore. So as much as you can, try to design and select your fresh starts to not conflict with or interfere with current good behaviors you'd like to maintain, because it can just as well become fresh stops of desirable behaviors as it can fresh starts for eliminating bad behaviors or starting new good behaviors. So the next one was impulsivity, and this is essentially the idea of favoring short-term immediate pleasure, like eating a McDonald's breakfast because you like them. I love them. It's probably one of my worst habits. In favor, essentially favoring the short-term reward and reinforcement because you put it in your mouth, it tastes good right away, versus the delayed gratification. You might know about the marshmallow study. If you don't, reach out to me. I'm not going to talk about it anymore during this episode. Reinforcement from the immediate pleasure is more immediate and more reinforcing, especially when you're competing against the longer term benefit or reinforcement of having a six-pack or being healthy or being able to play with your kids because you said no to some of those McDonald's breakfasts or all of them. That's a challenge, and that's a very universal one because eating is so fundamental to our survival that most people have that challenge. Now, I successfully do both. I indulge sometimes, but I mostly don't, and I exercise regularly. So the next one, and this is actually part of the same one, is a horrifying but not that surprising statistic from her book, and that is that 9% of premature deaths worldwide are caused by a lack of exercise. So the personal changes around eating and exercising are some of the most fundamental and the most unsuccessful. Some of the least successful change efforts are around the two personal behaviors of eating healthier or eating less and exercising more. Now, Milkman talks about something that's actually pretty cool. I've done this, but I didn't have a name for it. Sometimes I watch TV or do some other fun activity while I'm going through images, stock images for my backgrounds and stuff. I'll watch a streaming show on my computer at the same time. So that's essentially what she's talking about, and she calls it temptation bundling. I thought that was a cool name. So essentially what it is to get yourself to do something challenging. She takes it to the next level, not just do a fun thing with a more challenging or boring thing. That is to say, it's going to take some self-discipline and you're going to need to want to change or you'll never do it. But to get yourself to do something challenging, pair it with something rewarding. So her example and some research she did that she talked about in the book was talking about listening to audiobooks, especially if you love listening to audiobooks, only at the gym. That is, you don't listen to the audiobook unless you're at the gym. And they took it a step further by actually keeping the iPods or the listening devices at the gym, and they could only access them if they go to the gym, check in, and get on a machine, then they're given it again. And we'll talk about the difference between hard and soft commitments later, but that's an example of a hard commitment where it's being forced upon you or enforced on you, and why sometimes that's the best option. Now, I love this one, and this is a good analogy to what I do when I'm teaching young kids. And it was somewhere, I think it was in Europe. She talked about they had a company had put in a piano staircase. That is a staircase in a train station or a transit station, where as you walked up the steps, it was different piano keys. And they did the research where people recording that same exit before and after the piano staircase was installed, and the number of people who decided to now take the stairs because they played music. It was really, really cool, and basically was a hit. So pairing something fun or making something immediately rewarding that typically isn't is a good technique. And that's exactly what I do with kids. I'm playing a game, we're dancing around, stop. And then I show them a flashcard. And then they have to correctly identify it or whatever, or not. So it's always pairing fun or making something fun, and then encouraging them to do something that they probably would rather not do if it wasn't fun. They can't get a 2 to 5 year old to do anything unless there's some part of it that they want to do. So that's an example of temptation bundling. The next one was procrastination. And is there a person on earth who isn't an expert at this? So this is where we're going to talk about hard and soft commitments. A hard commitment would be reinforcing it. Like if you're not on time at work, if you don't arrive on time at work, the first time you're late, you're fired, or you're fired after 2 infractions or whatever it is. That's a hard commitment. Another one is there's a famous company that Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein talk about in their books, their Nudge series. And that is a company called Stick, spelled Stickk, I think. And what they do is they set up essentially digital contracts, electronic contracts. So if you say, I want to go to the gym 3 days a week, and if I don't, I will give $1,000 to a charity I hate. So if you're an environmentalist, you could give a donation to, promote the use of coal in industry, and you have to give that money to them. Or you could do the reverse. You could say, you could reverse it and say, I will deposit money into an account, and I will and I must work out X days a week or quit smoking and submit to a test, a nicotine test, to prove I haven't smoked. And each week or each month, I will deposit $100 into a bank account. And if at the end of the time I test positive, that is, I have been smoking, all the money is gone. So it doesn't have to be loss aversion, but anything where there's a hard reinforced commitment from an outside party is what they call a hard commitment. And Milkman's research showed that hard commitments are by far the most effective, but also by far the least popular, which makes sense because then you have to take ultimate hardcore radical responsibility. You either do it or you don't, and it's not just you. Now, she talks about how soft commitments aren't as good, but there is ways to make soft commitments more powerful. And the one that I've done with these videos is I publicly, on the first day of this year, said, I will do a video every day for this entire year. Now, there's three components, and this goes to Robert Cialdini's work on social proof and commitment and consistency in particular, two of his levers of influence. So commitment and consistency says, do your words and your actions align with your beliefs? And social proof is exactly what it sounds like. It's, well, they're doing it. The cool kids are doing it. I should do it too. Oh, that famous sports star wears those shoes, so I should do it too. So he talks about making commitments. The most likely soft commitment devices you can use, and that's Katie Milkman's term, or the term that I learned from her, was at any time you basically set up some conditions around your commitment, she calls it a commitment device. Now, the most powerful commitment device I'm currently aware of that isn't hard, involving real losses or real gains and a third party administrating them for you, would be what Cialdini said need three components. They are active, they are public, and they are effortful. So that is in the making of the commitment, not the action of the behavior or change. So I actively announced on my very first day that I would be making a video every day. And on day 256, I have so far been successful. Unless there's a medical or similar uncontrollable reason, it's very likely I will succeed because of the history I've already shown on. It was public. You, whoever's watching this, will know if I didn't do it, because I literally transmit these out to the world. So I've got that public accountability. That's super powerful for a lot of people. And effortful. The effort of making the commitment was actually small. But if I had to say, climb to the top of Mount Fuji, hike to the top of Mount Fuji, to make that commitment public, then it would also have an effortful component. So that's why, you know, people sign contracts and show them in online courses, or draw a picture, or say, go find 3 places and take a picture of yourself beside X, Y, and Z to prove that you've been hiking. That would be an example of effortful, public, and active. So having all 3 components makes your soft commitments the most powerful they can be made. So the next one is forgetfulness. If or when you implement, you basically do one of 2 things, actually. You do what Charles Duhigg called if, when, then statements, or if-then statements, sort of like, if I'm tempted to eat my McDonald's breakfast, then I will wait 10 minutes. I will set a timer for 10 minutes. Then if I still want it, I'll go eat it. That is making a plan to fail or interfere or prevent failure. Now, the official term that Milkman and other psychologists or people in the behavioral area call this is an implementation intention. And implementation intentions are the same thing. They work better if they're specific and concrete. And they talk about political pundits encouraging people to go out and vote. And they would phone them, and then they would say, oh, well, what day are you going to vote on? Oh, well, where is your voting station? How long does it take you to get there? What route will you take? So the more specific and concrete the implementation plan is, that is your plan to fail or to prevent failure is, the more likely you will follow through. So this is one way to do it, and one way to prevent yourself from forgetting, because that was essentially that was forgetfulness. That was actually the title of that chapter. I only have enough time for one from each. The next one is laziness. And this is one of the also very fundamental things about humans. Our brains have evolved to save energy. You are lazy. Get over it. Even if you're super ambitious, human default of every human being I have ever met and every human being I'm aware of so far, are fundamentally lazy. And this isn't a bad thing. This is inherited because, you know, if you wasted energy 2,000 years ago, or even 200 years ago, you may starve before you reach your next meal. And if you die of starvation, you never have babies, you never have ancestors that become us. So saving energy, that is being lazy, never doing work unless it's absolutely necessary, is the default of our species, but it is not destiny. We can choose to work hard, but that takes discipline and practice and habit. So essentially the thing that she found, which was really great, and this was some of the validation stuff I was aware of, but had never seen validation for, and that is strict, rigid routines are better for starting. So if you say every Monday at 7 a.m., I will go to the gym, that can be very effective at helping you establish habits, especially when they're new. So if we're starting and establishing habits, oftentimes a really strict, clear-cut, absolute hardline rules are effective because they get you started, they make you do it. Unfortunately, they are fragile, and what can happen is if for some reason on Monday you couldn't make it because you were sick or your car didn't start, that now because the habit is fragile and rigid, you've already missed it. The probability of you missing it again, or that habit being broken because it has no flexibility for life and changing circumstances, goes up. So long term, it's actually better to have flexible habits. My exercise for now 40 years has been flexible, and that's the only reason I'm still doing it for so long. Sometimes I do it at 5 a.m. In the summertime, 5 a.m. is the best time because it's cool. I exercise outside. I could exercise inside, and some days I can't do it early in the morning. So sometimes I do it late at night. The fact that it's flexible is the reason that I continue to do it. Because if I crash and burn or I'm lazy, it's not an excuse to not do it for the rest of that day or the rest of that week. It's like, you know, I can just do it at a different time. So flexible habits are stickier and more resilient in the long term. Next one is confidence. So only one point on this, and that is it's critical when you're pursuing challenging changes. And this is a quote, I think. Yes, it is. The decisive factor is how we respond. Now, there's a Japanese saying, which is actually Confucian, and that is basically fall down 7 times, stand up 8. And this also aligns highly with Angela Duckworth's work. I just recently read her book or listened to her book, and what comes down to that, grit. It's the idea of just never giving up. So encouraging people not to give up, praising them for their effort, the growth mindset stuff is a powerful way to do that. But the thing that really matters in terms of that aspect of success is what you do when you fail. And then that can loop back to things like implementation intentions, where you have a plan of what you will do when you do fail. Like, if I don't exercise today, I will exercise the next day or the next exercise day, depending on how you do your exercise. So the next one is conformity. And I thought this was really intriguing. I've never seen conformity, which I call social proof or commitment and consistency, but mostly social proof, based on Cialdini's work and the 7 levers of influence, usually described in a marketing context. And that is essentially using social proof that is being around, emulating, and hanging out, making friends with winners. Your mom and your dad were right. Hanging around with bad apples is more likely they will influence you. We all know this. So the social proof or the conformity, the commitment and consistency principles can be used to help you change. You want to change, hang around with high performers, even if at a distance, but ideally be involved with them. You see them going out exercising consistently and early, you're far more likely to do it yourself. So the next one is the final chapter, and she calls it Changing for Good, as in forever. And again, another quote here is, I think, the key insight from her friend, this is paraphrased actually, Her friend is, I believe, an epidemiologist or something, a doctor of some kind anyway. And Angela Duckworth was also associated with this book and some of the research. And while Angela said she was disappointed in the results of some of the research, the author, Katie Milkman, said she was happy about it. However, ultimately, she decided she wasn't that happy because both of them had to acknowledge that even all the techniques we've talked about so far, though they work effectively in the short term, none of them or few of them stuck long term for the majority of the population. And this is why I love this book. This is the first time it hasn't been, do this and you'll change forever. Your life will be perfect. Buy my course, buy my crap. It works for everyone all the time. Bullshit, which I think should actually be illegal and criminally a criminal offense, honestly. But it's not. So people can make false promises all the time. I don't believe in those. I believe in making real promises and showing what's possible, but people always have a choice. So her friend, who's a doctor, essentially said, you need to think about challenging our ongoing challenges with change and continuing desirable behaviors more like a chronic disease than a rash, more like a chronic disease than something you can fix with one pill. So there is no magic bullet for this, and she is the first and only person who works in behavioral change I have ever seen to actually overtly admit, yes, people are dynamic and they can adapt to these changes, so you may need and probably do need to dynamically adapt your starting and behavioral change effort to match or modulate as behavior changes or falls off desirable behaviors. Okay, so thank you for watching this far. I know it's a long video. Bonus content here is that is our best shared scientifically validated techniques. That is the ones I am delighted to say Milkman's work and her book validated for me that I wasn't certain had scientific validation, but I have been using based on experience and experimentation of my own. And that is, if you're hitting the wall, revise the question of what obstacles or impediments you're currently facing. That is, if you try something and it's not working, you need to look at what you need to tweak your approach to make the change, or you need to go back and review. It's like, what can I do different to instigate change? Or have I identified the obstacles correctly? Do I need to go back and am I trying to change things that are not relevant to making this habit stick? So I love that one. And especially the fact that she talked about the rethinking the obstacles, because to me, it's just like, this isn't working. What new solution can I come up with? Now, those two together are super powerful and work along the lines of that dynamic change to adapt to continue a desirable behavior. The next one was social proof, which I thought was brilliant because for me, it was a new insight to apply it to personal and organizational change rather than other types of influence, usually in the marketing area. But it's obvious, but it's been translated and I loved it. And this is where we get back to these commitments that I call APE. That is active, public, and effortful commitments as described, soft commitment devices as described by Cialdini in his work, in his brilliant, brilliant book, The New and Updated Influence, which is by far the best book on that topic I have ever read. So the next one was the fresh starts, but my principle is daily fresh starts. So they're not as impactful as meaningful and less frequent fresh starts. Every day, when you fall off the wagon on anything, provided you can give yourself personal self-compassion and personal psychological safety. If I don't work out today, it's not that big of a deal because I have the confidence to know I'll do it again. And by forgiving myself, Soon as you learn from it, the rest of it is a waste of mind space. So you can give yourself a big hug, forgive yourself, and move on and start again tomorrow. So daily fresh starts. Daily is mine, fresh starts is her concept, but it's totally the case. You can start anything you failed to do today, regardless of intentions or anything else, tomorrow. But it's key that you do that self-compassion. Otherwise, you'll be so busy beating yourself up, you'll get the sort of screw it. I've broken it now, which is oftentimes associated with not forgiving yourself. And there's an effect. I forget what it's called, but essentially, I broke my diet for today, so I'm eating crap all day. That kind of an effect is also a recognized phenomenon. I don't remember the name. So, and this comes from me and Roy Baumeister and Katie Milkman, and that is the fewer changes you do, and Duckworth as well, actually. The fewer changes you do, one being ideal, when you're doing a new change, if it's a challenging change that's not entrenched, the ideal number of changes to make at any one time is 1. The fewer changes you make, the less willpower and interference you can get from other things, and the more likely you will be able to make it stick or entrench it long term. And then once it's entrenched, now you can start a new habit because it's far less likely to disrupt or displace your old habit because it is now established. So that's it for the bonus material, and the recommended video for today is positivity strategies. I'll put a link there and in the description. So please help change lives by sharing this video with your loved ones. This has been Crush It Club 256, How to Change by Katie Milkman, book review. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.